Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. And first of all, I'd like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land here. And also, I'd like to acknowledge the guys that just presented. I'm a Narrabri boy, so the work that you're doing in Moree, fantastic stuff. It's really good to see the advancements in that type of stuff, so awesome. So the project that I would be speaking to you about today is a project that we're looking at with scrap metal vehicles that we're working with the government. So I'll just do a brief talk on these following topics, which will be an introduction to the working group that I'm the manager of, and then I'll speak about the project as far as the background, rationale, objectives, the products and the structure and operational plan as we move forward. Last year I was asked to present at this conference as well and we spoke about waste management best practice. And this is great to be coming the next year and to showing you we've moved on from best practice, so we're making some real achievements in waste management, but this is just a massive step for the Northern Territory. This is Central Australia, but it's making a massive difference in the whole of the Northern Territory. And as I go further through the presentation, you'll get to see how large my working group is. So when I talk about our working group in the Northern Territory, we actually take up 2/3 of the Northern Territory, so it's a massive area. So the Central Australian Waste Management Working Group was formed in 2012 with members including Barkly, McDonald and Central Desert Regional Councils, the Department of Environmental Health, the NT EPA, the Local Government Department of Housing and Community Development, NT WorkSafe and Legant. So they're all pretty heavy hitters and we work together to address each of our own issues in a singular way. So we work together to rather than work against each other, which is we all understand is a pretty big achievement in itself. So we do this amongst 33 remote communities with the populations ranging, and we have roughly the same amount of outstations, which is what we would classify as a very small community with a few houses or a few families living there. So that's my area. It's 1 million square kilometres. That's most of the 33 remote communities, and as you can see, it covers the borders from Western Australia, Queensland, South Australia, and 2/3 of the way up towards Darwin. So it's a pretty big area, and in the past we haven't achieved much because, as you can imagine, with those conditions out there and the small numbers that we're dealing with, it's very difficult to get any inroad. So the working group is, over the past 6 years, has won numerous awards. I won't go through all of those there now. I mean, there's some really impressive ones with our landfill stuff and tips and best community, small and medium and that type of stuff for the Northern Territory. And I'll just concentrate on that last point just there. So we've just returned from Tasmania a month ago, I think, roughly a month ago, where one of our communities in Northern Territory took out the nation's tidiest town for Australia. So that's an Indigenous community with a population of about 800 people. So that in itself shows you the work that's been done to a point where the stakeholders and the community are involved to a point where we're getting national recognition. And that is against some very, very impressive opposition. So heavy-hitting little communities in the Northern Territory. So the background to this project is that roughly 6 years ago, with the formation of this working group, we worked to improve resource recovery. So we came up with a standardised plan there, which you can see, which includes drop-off bays with our recyclable materials and what we wanted to move towards, and a compound at the back there for general waste pits or stockpiles. So the big thing, there's nothing special about that design. That's kind of what we all work towards. But prior to that 6 years ago, which isn't a very long time ago, each community and each area had a very narrow, shallow trench with waste that was burnt. So it wasn't a metre deep. It was only 20 metres wide and maybe 5 metres long. And there was just rubbish everywhere. We've seen photos of what in that previous presentation, and that was pretty much what the whole of the Northern Territory, that whole 1 million square kilometres looked like. We now have landfill sites, I'd have to say 30 of them, that look like the design that is there right now, which is compound fencing, proper waste management pits, which are 65 metres long, 3 metres deep, step sides and all the rest of it. We've got stockpiles, we've got signage and the rest of it. So that's a pretty good achievement. That you can see a drop-off bay there, community drop-off bay, is just constructed at Santa Teresa, and that in itself it doesn't look very, very impressive when you probably go to the landfill here in Coffs Harbour, but in Central Australia that's state of the art, so we're pretty proud of that. So we did an audit in 2017 where we worked out that throughout that whole area, through that 1 million square kilometres, not just what council looked after, but everything else on Crown land and everything else within Central Australia, back then there was about 32,000 tonnes worth of scrap metal that was sitting there that's never had a service. Well, never had a service, not much of a service. So with the work that's currently being done now by the government, with things like room to breathe, say construction work, we can only see that the scrap metal, and with the separation improvements as well, as we can only see scrap metal as one waste stream, the volume's increasing massively. Also, the abandoned vehicles, which I put in with the scrap metal as a one kind of material. As you can imagine out there, whether you spend $1,000 on a car, whether you spend $40,000 on a car, the road conditions out there with the dust alone, let alone the dirt and the roughness, the vehicles just don't last. So pretty much where they die is where they live. So throughout that whole road network, there's just a growing number of these scrap metal laying around. So in the past, roughly 5 of the 33 communities have received a service from the scrap metal people, and they're basically because they're based along the Stewart Highway, which is the sealed road that leads between Darwin and Adelaide. So to try and improve the service levels, we had discussions with this operator, and for a better service, because 5 of the 33 it means that we're not really getting much of a service. Or I would argue that there's no service at all, and basically it can't happen. It can't happen for a number of reasons. So it was rejected. The plant that they'd recently bought, New Baylor, was incapable of going on a dirt road, and they just don't have the staffing to do that type of work, or the staff that are willing to go out to a remote community that's 700 kilometres from the latest or the local Alice Springs. So we can only assume that moving forward, these discussions have been 10 years in the making. We can only assume that after 10 years moving forward that there's just not going to be another service. There's not going to be a service to the degree that we're needing to get the service done. So this is just a couple of diagrams to give you an idea. So that red line going down the centre of Australia is the Stewart Highway. And when you put it up against the other communities, it doesn't cover much of what we're dealing with. So I've just spoken briefly about what an issue it is in Central Australia with these abandoned vehicles. So in 2017, I think it was around May or June 2017, I received a phone call from the NT government to see whether our working group might be interested in resolving the car issue in Central Australia, if not starting with the Northern Territory, for funding a baling machine. So they asked us to put a business plan together. So we already had ideas from the working group of where we wanted to be, but it was a really lovely phone call to get from the government offering something to get moving. So as I investigated the situation, or as the working group investigated the situation further, we discovered things like the service operators don't have the ability to service Central Australia, or very much the Northern Territory for that matter. Transport issues are major and just far too costly, and the overall cost to clean up, a once-off clean-up, is not sustainable. It's a large amount of money. So with all that information, we decided to include in our business plan, a scrap metal business plan, so where we got all the stakeholders involved in that 1 million square kilometres. If you can imagine the area that the councils look after, although it's 1 million square kilometres, we only cover really the land at each community, which is the outside fence line of each community. So of that 1 million square kilometres, councils, it's a dot on a page. So we had to get the other stakeholders involved. to service the rest of the area, and that included Alice Springs Town Council, which is not part of the working group, but more of an advisory role, the Crown Land, and we wanted to be able to provide a service that was ongoing and sustainable, rather than just $1 million, $2 million for initial clean-up that we haven't had for much more than 10 years, and then that money would be needing to be spent within 5 or 10 years again. So the business plan that we submitted is about establishing a metal recycling and sorting operation that includes abandoned vehicles and the scrap metal, turning recycling opportunities, starting with the metal, into social enterprise type income, which in turn can then be reinvested back into waste management opportunities. So we start with metal, which most councils do, but then that gives us an opportunity to get rid of all the other recyclables off these communities and bring them back. So it's all about forming a recycling unit based on sound business practices, ensuring that recycling is sustainable in Central Australia, cleaning up country, which is needed, minimising landfill, creating jobs using local labour, improve economic development, and investigating options and processing and value adding to recycling products. So that's just a break-up of the audit and where the metal lies and the volumes that are there. And even if you just were to look at each of those different lines separately, it's not a large volume. You've got to remember that apart from, well, including the Crown Land, that's spread, those volumes individually are still spread over that 1 million square kilometres. So the idea of bringing this all together adds up to a total of 32,000 tonne. I'd say it'd be more like 35 to 40,000 tonne. So with that opportunity to go to market and say to the metal market we have 40,000 tonnes of scrap metal, all of a sudden we've become extremely popular. So the structure of this business unit, we'll look at, it'll be owned by the 3 councils as partners, and what will happen to form this business unit is that we will establish a subsidiary to spread out liability, which is the main reason for this, and to give it some purpose. The councils will then fund this subsidiary based on NT government funding, and will then acquire the equipment and plant equipment to start the business unit and get it moving. So the subsidiary will be run by a manager or a general manager, yet to be decided, that will answer to a board of directors, which happen to be the CEOs of each of the councils. And that's, to this point, the CEOs haven't been involved in the working group to any large degree other than signing off the checks and that type of stuff. So to have them answerable to the working group, as we can all imagine with our work history with waste and that type of stuff, it's having the person that's capable of making real budget improvements to the work that we do. So that was quite significant in itself. And the advisory board will consist of the current working group members and the board of directors. So that doesn't change. So they'll still be in there. But what we're really doing now is really bringing and engaging our CEOs, which is a major thing. The operational staff will consist of a production supervisor, a couple of plant operators, local staff at each of the communities. So this will be a mobile plant that will move around each community in a milk run to keep costs low, and we will train and utilise current staff in each of the communities as well as. 2 minutes to go? Okay. And all the governance and the accounting will be performed by council biz and our council staff as well as. I think it's stuck. I think I bored it to death.
It's just shocked, 1 million square kilometres.
It's got tired. So I can only assume that someone's working on that from the back. So I'll just keep moving forward, guys, and hopefully we can catch up. There we go. So the operational plan will be that the plan will take 3 years to service these the volumes that we've investigated, and it'll be all about baling the scrap metal in the cars up into 1.1 tonne bales. Once it's cleaned up, we will then start looking at the separation of ferrous and non-ferrous just to maximise income. So once they're all baled up, they'll then be transported to a depot location. So that's our area of Central Australia with all our communities. The furthest over is where we're looking to put depots. So we will transport each of the bales on our plant and equipment back to these depots. These depots are all based around the Stewart Highway, so we've got access to transport. The market will cover the cost of transport, so that won't come out of the dollar that we are making out of the scrap metal. That's really important because prior to this, not only did we not get a service, but we didn't get any income either. Not only did we not get an income for our scrap metal, it actually cost us to go get a service. So the providers prior to that were price of metal were low as well as, so there is some reasons for that, but it used to be a liability, now we're turning it into an income, and it's also engaging transport operators, which can be utilised locally as well as, and what it means is the scrap metal, as an example, is worth $300. The council gets $100, the transport operator gets $100, and the market gets $100. That's pretty fair. And what it does, it reinvests back into that business unit, makes it sustainable, makes it ongoing. Everyone's making the money that they need to make, and it's pretty fair and ongoing. The money that's made, there will be a surplus, we believe to be a surplus, and the money that will be left over will be reinvested back into waste activities or balers for other recycled materials such as plastic and that type of stuff to benefit waste management. So this is just the plant and equipment that we're looking at buying through capital funding from the NT government. It includes a baler, an excavator, loader, transport for the staff that are operating it, a semi-trailer with 2 trailers so we can carry 48 tonnes of scrap metal or 48 bales at each time back from the community back to the depots, and then the fuel cell and that type of stuff to run the business. There's other capital expenditure which includes training and that type of stuff moving forward, and licences and regulatory requirements. We put some very vague figures into this presentation and I was asked to take them all out. For no other reason, it's a little bit new, and I think I made my CEOs pretty nervous, so they asked me to take it out. But what we're saying is that if there's an income of $1 million, this business unit will cost roughly $900,000 to operate a year. They're superficial figures, but it's sustainable, moving ongoing. So there's no cost involved, there's a small income, but we're cleaning up country and all those other things that we've mentioned beforehand. It'll take 3 years, processing about 240 tonnes a week over 44 weeks only. That's roughly what industry does in a day. But because we're council, because we're remote, because of the skill set that we have, we've put it down to the lowest level to make sure there's no point investing money again from the NT government into a project to disappoint remote Australia if it's not sustainable. So we've kept these figures where we make a small profit based on very low levels, so that we should be really quite easily able to achieve. So hopefully we can do even better. So profit and loss is there will be a profit basically after plant and equipment, depreciation, staffing, operational costs, moving forward after 3 years. We assume that roughly 5,000 tonnes of scrap metal is deposited into Central Australia, which means that every 3 to 5 years we're in the same position again. So again, we just believe that our figures match that this is a sustainable project. The profits reinvested back into the waste, sustainable whilst the 10,000 odd tonnes per annum are available, and the prices are roughly where they are.